Hi everyone, it's Katie, and in this video I just wanted to share with you the books that I've read so far this year. It's the end of May, so we're getting, towards the midway point, and I just wanted to go over the books that I've read this year and, kind of my thoughts and feelings about what I have read. And so perhaps this will give you an idea of some books that you might want to read, or perhaps not read. But I thought it would also be nice to kind of document my experience of the books that I've read so far this year. One of the first books that I read this year was Energy Essentials for Witches and Spellcasters by Maya Om. It's just a small book, and it was, didn't take me too long to get through it, but I did really like it. It's just really, really down-to-earth, practical guide to getting to know energy, what it is and how it works, and how you can harness it. It's got a lot of exercises and little practical steps for you to take. From memory, the author is Wiccan, but she grew up with her grandmother who was a gypsy and practiced magic in her own way. So she has a lot of interesting examples to provide, but she also just discusses the really basic practical stuff. Also just talks about why spells don't work sometimes and how we can adjust what we're doing to make them work next time. So I really enjoyed this book, and I think it's something that I'll probably come back to over time. Another book that I read earlier in the year is The Pictorial Key to the Tarot by Arthur Edward Waite. Now this book came in the box set of the Pamela Colman Smith commemorative set tarot. So I have that version of the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, and in the box came this book and a few other pieces of artwork by Pamela Colman Smith. And I did find this book really interesting as an historical text. I remember, I think it was Annie from Mirth and Reverence saying something along the lines of Waite spending a lot of time basically hating on other people for getting it wrong when it comes to tarot. And I definitely agree. He spends quite a lot of time explaining why other people got it wrong, but not quite as much time describing and explaining to you what his cards mean and why they're right. There is plenty of detail about some of the symbolism he chose, but again, a lot of it is about why he didn't choose other pieces of symbolism. It's not a very long read though. The major arcana are about 1.5 pages to 2 pages each, and then the minor arcana are just a paragraph each. There is quite a lengthy introduction though, which I did find interesting, which discusses, tarot as a tradition, and the history of tarot, things like that. So I did find this really interesting, but I wouldn't read it as a way to learn to read the tarot. I would read it, it's of historical interest, I think. This is a little book that I picked up at Savers. It's by Deepak Chopra, The 7 Spiritual Laws of Success, a practical guide to the fulfillment of your dreams. I wasn't sure what I would think of this book because I don't think I've ever read anything by this author before, but I actually really enjoyed it. It didn't take me very long to read. I think I read it in one day, but I did find myself, taking little notes and writing things down. It's very to the point. I think it's about 100 pages long, just over 100 pages long, and he doesn't really do that thing of going into the, the story of people that he's worked with and things like that. It's just really to the point, practical, the different laws of success, what they are, and how you can apply them. So I really, really enjoyed it. There were a few laws that I perhaps didn't get on board with as much as the others, such as the law of karma. I'm not, quite into karma, but I did really appreciate the way that he described things, and I really enjoy this book as a general read. Drawing Down the Sun by Stephanie Woodfield. I read this book as part of Tara Incognita's Witchy book club, which is great fun, and you should definitely come along and join us if you haven't already. I really, really like this book. Basically, it's a discussion of different goddesses throughout history and throughout different cultures that were associated with the sun. So they were solar deities. So it's really just offering an alternative view to that idea that we get a lot in modern paganism, that the moon is feminine and the sun is masculine. That quite strict binary that we see. She's just really offering an alternative in this book. So I really enjoyed this book. I've done a review on this book actually, so I'll leave the link to that below. As part of Tara's book club, we also read The Earth Path by Starhawk. which I don't have on me because I have lent to someone. I really liked that book. I felt like it kind of fizzled out towards the second half. I think with Starhawk, she tends to get very into the details, and if you're not super keen on the topic that she's describing, sometimes it can get a little bit tiresome. When she was discussing her ideas and her concepts, though, I was in love with it. Another book that we read with the book club was Real Magic by Isaac Bonewits. And it was a while ago that we read that book, so I'm a little bit sketchy on the details, but I remember liking it but not loving it. Obviously, I think I donated it, so it wasn't a favourite of mine. I picked up a book called Spells and How They Work by the Farrars from Sabres. I read that book in about a day or two, so it was an easy read. But from memory, I liked it, but I didn't feel like it answered the questions of how do spells work and what are they. It was kind of almost like autobiographical. It was just a lot of chit chat about people that they know and experiences that they've had. There were some interesting points to take away from it, but yeah, I just really didn't feel like it answered the title's questions of what are spells and how do they work. This is another book that I picked up from Sabres called Awakening Female Power, The Way of the Goddess Warrior by Karen LaPuma. This is, I don't know how old this book is, I forgot to check. I think it's from like the 90s or the 80s even. I actually really liked this book. I took quite a few notes from it. I mean, some of it was common sense and some of it was stuff that I've already kind of worked out for myself. But it kind of reminded me of if you took Women Who Run with the Wolves and crossed it with like a Doreen Virtue self-help sort of book, I think you'd get this book. She talks a lot about different archetypes and different, fairy tales and folklore stories, and goes over those stories and then talks about how they relate to modern women and experiencing your inner power. So she has 3 different main sections in this book. The first is called Wake Up, in which she talks about obviously waking up to, our current societal system as its own myth, really. And just acknowledging and being aware of that and how that affects us as individuals. The second part is called Be Centered, and that's really what it sounds like. Being centered, balancing the duality in life, things like that. And the third section is Invoking the Goddess, and she really just discusses different warrior aspect goddesses and how they apply to us now, and also about healing the inner child and exploring our mother and crone aspects, things like that. And yeah, I really, really liked this book. A book that I read a couple of months ago is The Book of Lilith by Barbara Black Koltuv, PhD. This is actually quite a short book, but it's quite meaty, so it took me a little while to read. In this book, she retells a lot of different myths and stories of Lilith throughout history, because obviously the concept of Lilith crosses many different cultures and time periods. So there is a lot of information and discussion around the Lilith of the Genesis story, but there's also a lot about her Babylonian and Sumerian aspects. And there's a lot of discussion around how those are similar and how those differ. What I found really interesting though is this book, coming from a Jungian analyst, obviously we explore how the archetype of Lilith really applies to us as individuals, especially women, and how she represents the instinctual, sensual sort of side of femininity that has been repressed and really despised by society and also people for so long. And she also discusses how this changing stories of Lilith really kind of reflected the changing opinions and attitudes towards women. And I just absolutely loved this book. This is probably one of my favourite reads so far this year. This month I finished reading The Body Sacred by Dianne Sylvan. This is a book that I've had on my shelf for a little while, but I haven't quite felt ready for. I've mentioned before that I've had eating disorder issues, which presented both as restriction and binging at different times throughout my life. So body positivity is a really important issue for me to kind of embrace, but it's also something that I need to be sensitive when I explore. This book I liked. I didn't love, but I did like it. Obviously, it's just really about appreciating and accepting our bodies in whatever shape or form they are in at the moment. And as Dianne Sylvan is a Wiccan high priestess, obviously she kind of does focus more on the pagan side of body positivity, really viewing our bodies as the divinity that they are and treating them as such. She does also touch on the ethics of eating and food, and she also goes into the importance of accepting our bodies as sexual and sensual, and that's okay. At the moment, I'm reading a library book called Teach Yourself Jung. I just had some spare time, so I went to the library. I've already read some of the chapters. I've kind of skipped through. I'm not reading it in order. And it's just basically an introduction to Jung, about some of his work, and also about some important aspects of his life that influenced his work. So I'm actually finding it quite an easy read, and so far I'm liking it. I guess I should make note that I've also reread all of the Harry Potter books this year, so that's another 7 to that pile. I'll leave the details of all the titles and authors of all of the books that I've mentioned in this video in the description below, just in case you're interested in looking them up for yourself. If you've read any of the books that I've mentioned, I'd love to hear from you. If you have any other book recommendations of your own, I'd also love to hear those. I'm always looking for more books to read. And if you have any other comments or questions, just leave them below, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. So I hope you've enjoyed my little show and tell. I'm always reading something, so I think I'll endeavour to do this sort of video maybe once every 6 months, depending on how many books I read. But that's all for this video. I will see you guys all next time. Until then, much love. Bye.